Okay, too.
Yeah, no problem. Basically grew up in Central Jersey, youngest of three boys. In my the two brothers, and we grew up in the central area part of New Jersey. And when I was about 4 or 5, this was in the 70s when I was that age. When I was about 4 or 5, my parents had gotten divorced. Mother had gotten, a little bit later, gotten a new man, and he was like the opposite of our biological father. Our biological father was one of those guys that Mr. Reserves, craziest thing he probably ever did was drink a beer and play Monopoly or something. But this next guy was like the complete opposite, and I think that's why, And anyway, he turned out to be pretty abusive, to put it mildly. And so one of the things my mother would try to do, she knew that we didn't like him, a couple years gone by. I don't think she really knew exactly what was going on to this day, but one of the things she'd like to do is when we were off from school is just to get us all, at least me and my middle brother, out of the house for the summer. So my neighbor across the street, we were really close with them, and the one boy was my age, and the other son they had was the same age as my middle brother. And they had an uncle who lived up in the northwest corner of New Jersey, which is the one area of New Jersey that looks pretty close to where you live. It's all forest, and that goes from, if you go west from there, you're going to go into the forests of Pennsylvania, and if you go north from there, you'll go into the forest in upstate New York. So it's a really big forested area. And he had a small horse farm up there that backed up to a couple national forests. In those national forests, you got the kitty mountains, there's swamps, everything. And just like I said, it just goes on and on and on. I guess the first time I heard it, I was probably about 8 or 9, and it wasn't every night. We'd be up there usually about a month. We'd stay with them. And he had a boat up on Lake Opakon, so there was like a million things to do. We'd shoot 22 rifles and, walk the woods during the day and go fishing and stuff. It was a lot of fun. But there was one day in particular, we were hanging out at barbecue, and it was during the day. And we started hearing screaming. And basically what it sounded like to me at the time was just people, but like loud people, screaming. One would scream to our left, and then there'd be a response to the right. One would scream to the left again, and it was basically back and forth, which, didn't seem too odd, I guess, but it was more the reaction of the uncle and his 2 sons and his wife that made it bizarre. And as soon as they heard that noise, they immediately sort of kicked into action, essentially. And the way his property was set up, he had a horse pen closest to the woods. It was the larger of the 2 pens. And then he had one closest to the house. And the first thing he asked us to do with his sons was get the horses from that far pen back closer to the closer pen. So, we're helping as much as we can, and we're trying to, find answers, because they're, frantically trying to get these horses. And I'm like, dude, what the hell is going on? And they really wouldn't talk about it. So we get the horses in, and then the next step was he had a bunch of, I wouldn't say a bunch, maybe 4 or 5 dogs, and they were on tie-outs. And we had to move those dogs from the far tie-outs to the tie-outs, basically right up against the house. So once we completed all that, the screaming continued, and finally we sat down to eat. And me and my brother just kept pressing them. And then finally the uncle said, he goes, all right, here's the deal. The street that they lived on, it was only about 6 houses, and they were pretty spread out. And he said that one of the women that lived in one of the houses had these 3 sons, and that they were very dangerous and crazy, and they would go in the woods, drink, cause ruckus, and bother all the people on the street. And he said he just didn't trust them, essentially. And said they were like vandals. So as weird as it sounded, when you grow up in New Jersey, there's no such thing as Bigfoot. It's just the farthest thing from anybody's mind.
Yeah.
And I probably did see, the Patterson film when I was a kid, and I probably looked at it, and 5 minutes later forgot I saw it, type of thing, So anyway, that only happened a few times during the day. It would mostly happen at night. And when it happened at night, And I'd say if I went there 30 days, this probably happened maybe 10, if I'm guessing. You know, didn't happen every night, that's for sure. And I noticed when it happened at night, they seemed even more nervous than they did during the day. So,
when you say it happened, do you mean the vocalizations, the screaming? That
I'm sorry. Yes, they would start vocalizing again, and it was mostly just sounded like screaming. And like I was telling you, Wes, the best way I could attribute it to was when the recordings you got from Texas, when it sounded like just people screaming back and forth. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of that, like Ohio howl, and I don't even remember hearing anything like that. There probably was a few whoops, like mixed in, but it was mostly just the screaming. So that was like the gist of it, you know, when I was a kid. So, but like I said, I noticed when these vocalizations would start again, and it happened at the nighttime, the family seemed to react like a little stronger to it. Like at nighttime we'd build a fire over by the barn, which was probably 300 yards from the house. I had a pretty large piece of property. I was thinking 15 acres, but I double checked on that, and it was more like 22, which I know isn't like huge, but in Jersey it is.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Know? So we'd make a fire at night and sneak beer and just hang out, and when those vocalizations would start, we'd immediately have to stop that fire out, get the dogs, and bring the party to like right up by the house. And you could just tell they were nervous, you know what I mean? So anyway, you fast forward a bunch of years, and now I'm 19 at this point, because we went up there this continued through the years, like I said, off and on, but it was kind of uneventful as far as it was just basically, you know, vocalizations. So you fast forward to when I'm 19, and I had gotten into MMA as a young kid. And by the time I was 18, I already had a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, a black belt in Muay Thai, and I had been wrestling in school my life and just taking MMA. So I had tried out for the IFC, which was recently formed, and I had won a contract to fight professionally in the IFC. So we were just kind of celebrating that. And so we took our girlfriends, me and my brother, the two kids from across the street, and we were just going to celebrate for like a week or two with that family. Because I had about 6 months before I had to take off and start. So we get up there, and we're hanging out at night again by the barn, and the vocalizations start again. And this time, they're a lot closer than what I remember them being, you know? And this time we're older, we're not kids anymore.
Yeah, at this point you're hearing these vocalizations still being told that it's the kids up the street, and at this point,
guys, which, you know, we should have known right there, like all these years later. It's a little weird.
Well, yeah, but and the other point too is, you know, with all your training, you're you're still a kid, but you're not a kid to be messed around with at this point.
Yeah, I wasn't really worried about it, you know. So, and I don't know if it's the same with you, Wes, but my older brother was like the angel on my shoulder, and my middle brother was like the devil. You know, I don't know if your brothers are like that, but. So we started, and like I said, these vocalizations were closer. They were just a lot closer than I remembered. I would say probably within 100 yards, and they were loud, you know. So now I'm starting to put the homeowner to task, and I'm like, what is the deal with this? You know, like you just let these people run around here and scream like that, and you're afraid they're going to hurt your animals, obviously. So my middle brother starts, you know, egging me on, like, you know, you're not allowed to fight for 6 months. By the time you get up there, you're going to be rusty. You know, trying to get me to go.
Yeah.
Challenge these guys, you know, just telling me how, dude, if you don't do it, man, you're gonna go out there, get your ass kicked, get cut, and come back, you know. So he's egging me on, and he wouldn't stop. So finally, I'm like, screw it. So I get up and I start heading towards the vocalizations. And at this point, the two homeowners basically run in front of me and like physically grab me, and they're like, "You can't do it," you know. And I'm like, dude, why? Like, let's put an end to this, you know. So I could tell they were nervous to come up with a reason why. And then the one brother just blurts out, well, they're armed. I'm like, they're armed? He's like, yeah, they probably got handguns, you know? So I'm like, bro, if there's people screaming over here with handguns, maybe you should call the friggin' police, you know? So we're trying to talk them into that, and they just wouldn't do it. And they were acting, you know, really strange. And I remember we were driving home. It happened about 3 nights when we were there. We were there about 7 days. And 3 of the nights it happened, and all 3 nights, each night that it happened, me and my brother were looking at each other like something is not right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was just really bizarre. And I remember the one night when we went to sleep in the house, I heard some walking around on the outside of the house. And then I just figured that when I went to bed, maybe they kept drinking and hanging out there. In the morning, I had asked, like, I thought everybody went to bed. And they were like, yeah, we did. So I said, we were eating breakfast. And I said, well, somebody was walking around on the outside of this house. And the gentleman that owned the house, the uncle, basically said, like, oh, no, it's probably them guys. And I'm like, wait a minute, these guys walk up to your house armed? And then he looks at me like, armed? And then he looks at his son, and they're looking at each other, and I think he realized that, because the uncle wasn't out there at night that time when that happened, when I wanted to go. So I think he realized, oh yeah, they're armed, but you could tell he covered it up. So I looked at my brother and I said, something is definitely up. So anyway, we leave. We definitely left with more questions than answers. And my older brother at the time was breeding pit bulls, and one of the sons at the place wanted to get a pup. So he actually came back with us, and he picked out a puppy. So now you fast forward like 2 years later, and I come home from a tour in Canada with the IFC, and they're having a party at my neighbor across the street's house, and that family that was from the farm are there. And I just start, we were hanging out, catching up, because I hadn't been there since that last time. And one of the brothers, like in the middle of the night, they had some beers, slips and says that their dog was killed, the puppy that my brother gave him. And I'm like, what do you mean the dog was killed? And I was telling you, Wes, to us, dogs were part of the family. So saying that somebody killed our dog was like saying that somebody killed our little brother, And that might sound weird to some people, but that's just how it was. So,
no, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, I was pretty pissed off about it. And I was just riding him until I got it. And he knew that I wasn't playing at this point. And he wasn't giving me the suffice answers. He did eventually say that it was those kids, those dudes that killed this dog. So I knew that the next morning I was driving. When they left, I was going to follow up behind them, talk to the father, and have him finally take me to these people's house. It was done at that point. So I had gotten up there. I think they left in the morning, and I probably slept in. And I didn't get up there till about 3 in the afternoon. And I knocked on the door, and the uncle answers. And at this point, this guy was like a father to me, So I sat him down, and I said, listen, these guys, your son told me that these guys killed his dog. I'm telling you right now. And he knew me, I said, I'm not leaving here until you take me to their house. And I think at that point he knew I wasn't going to let it go, The other times I let it go, and this time I wasn't letting it go because they had killed the dog. So he goes in the house. He said, give me a minute. Comes back out with a bottle, and he says, listen, here's the deal. He said, these things are Sasquatch. And I'm like, they're what? And he goes, he's like, you ever see the Patterson Gimlin film or anything like that, like Bigfoot? And I'm like, now I remember kind of what, it is. I'm just thinking like an upright ape at that point, And actually, ironically, the people that lived on that street, the nickname they had for them was wood apes. That's what, I don't know where they got that from. I never really asked. But when I had called the brother recently, I said, what did you, I couldn't remember the first time I talked to you what they called them, and I called him back, and he's like, yeah, they called them the elder people, like their parents called them wood apes. So I was like, all right.
That's interesting.
What's different enough? You'll hear that every day.
Yeah.
So he starts telling me that there are these wood apes that are like, he said they've seen them a lot, He said they would get activity the entire summer, and then like the first month of the winter. And then he said they must have migrated off somewhere because they wouldn't hear anything, he said. Like nothing. It was like they weren't there, They wouldn't get any vocalizations. They wouldn't get anything. But in the summer, he said when the berries were ripe and the deer and the coyote and the feral pigs were in that area, they were in that area. And when everything dried up in the winter, like froze up, I should say, they were gone. And he said they had multiple sightings and that they would come up on the house and sometimes and mess with the house. So I don't remember that happening when I was there. Like I did hear the walking around once, but I don't remember them he said they would actually bang on the house or bang on the barn in the back, but they would be so loud that you could hear it in the bedrooms. And he said they did take a small horse once. He said they had killed 2 other dogs through the years. And he said that the biggest one, I asked him, like, what was the largest one that you've ever seen? And he said he estimated that at 9 foot. Because he saw it standing near the barn, and he remembered, like, about where the head was, and he went out the next day, or later that day with a tape measure, and he came up with a little bit, like, it's just a tad over 9 foot. And he estimated it about 4 or 5 foot wide. He thought it was easily 900 pounds, this particular one, which was the biggest one he'd ever seen. He said the average ones would be about a foot less and a couple 100 pounds less than that one. And he said that a guy that lives, I guess it was the next house over to the right, like I said, these houses were probably a mile apart, and there was only 6 to 8 of them on the block at the time. This whole area now has been mowed over, but this was back in the 80s and 90s that I'm referring to. And there was the houses were pretty well spread apart, but he became pretty close with the one guy, I guess it was off to his right, and he said that guy was having, like, serious problems, and this went back to probably when I was going there when I was about 15 or 16. He said it started to get pretty violent and hit in that gentleman's direction. And I said, like, what do you mean by violent? And he said that they were killing all kinds of stuff on that guy's property. And the guy had 2 daughters and a son, and he was thinking that his son and his friends did something to these things, because he said it went from being like a nuisance to real, and they'd see that one of the larger ones, I don't know if it was the 9 foot one or just a larger male, but he remembers seeing a larger male in the tree line watching his youngest daughter play on more than one occasion. And he was thinking, like, this thing's focusing in on my youngest daughter. Like, this was this guy's impression. So when all this violence was acting up, like killing their animals and really bashing on his house, he was, like, not going to sit around and wait for something to happen to his daughter, because he, other than farming, he had another job where he wasn't at the house much. So he was thinking, like, I'm going to come home one day, and it's not going to be a horse or a pig. It's going to be my daughter. So he got this uncle, the guy that I used to go to, and another guy, and they were going to come up with a plan. Now, the third party that was with these men used to do some big game hunting in Africa. So he had been familiar with larger caliber rifles for big game. So he suggested something big to knock these things down. Like, they didn't want to just, hit it, make something. They wanted to hit it and be done with it. So he was suggesting, he had a 460 Weatherby Magnum that he loaned them. And then the homeowner that was having the problems, he bought a 416 Remington Magnum. Now, I don't know if you're into ballistics, but these are big bullets. These are 400 or 500 grain bullets.
Yeah.
Traveling at, 2,700 feet a second and hitting with like 5,000 pounds of force. Like, these are the things they kill rhinos and elephants with,
That's what I was going to say. It's like an elephant gun.
Yeah, they weren't playing.
Yeah.
So they knew that every night this one male, and he assumed that the one that was really messing with the house and the animals was the same one watching his daughter from the tree line. He could have been wrong, but that was his assumption. And they knew that if they just waited it out on his porch, the thing was coming, So they spent, I think he said it was like a week in the summer waiting for this animal in the middle of the night. And I think it was about the 4th or 5th day, he had said, they start hearing the vocalizations and, movement in the woods around them to the back of the house. And eventually this thing comes out. And they must not have seen him, because he said what they did, the guy had one of those wraparound porches on his house. And they had set themselves up on the corner of the porch where this animal was known to come out. And he said they were sitting, like kneeling down, and they had the rifles on top of the porch. And I think he said they had like a blanket over them. I remember him saying it was real uncomfortable sitting there for hours. They were literally treating it like a hunt,
Yeah.
So the animal comes out, and the uncle that I spent all the time with was the one that took the shot. He said he took the shot from about 60 yards with that 460 Weatherby Magnum, and he said he heard that bullet hit it, and he hit it dead center. And he said you couldn't miss. Like he said, if you miss this animal, don't shoot no more. That's how wide it was. You know what I mean? So I remember saying like we were worried about missing, and he said if you couldn't hit this, then you couldn't hit the broad side of the barn. You know, it was pretty damn wide. So he hit it with the 460 Weatherby, and he said it went right down to 2 knees, got up, took 2 or 3 steps, and then made like a horrifying scream, and then collapsed. And I asked, like, you know, what kind of scream was it? And he said it was like what they were hearing in the woods, but times 100. You know, and he said it was loud. Like, he was thinking everybody on that block and anyone that was camped in that forest, in that national forest there, or state forest, I should say, heard it. Like, that's how loud it was. And then it dropped and it never moved again. But they noticed after that, maybe a few minutes after that shot, the woods around them kind of erupted. And it was more vocalizations than what they were used to hearing. He said it would be from all sides, just animals communicating back and forth and movement around the perimeter of the house. So they thought they were in trouble. So what they did was they went inside and they were going to wait it out in the living room. So they waited it out in the living room until the sun came up. Nothing happened to the house that night. They did hear the vocalizations outside getting louder and closer, but it was never, like, it never got bad where anyone in the house got woken up because they were pretty much used to it at the time, and none of these animals were beating on the house or anything like that. So they were expecting to come out in the morning and see that thing laying there, and then they weren't. Honestly, I remember him saying to me, like, we didn't have a plan for that. Like, we didn't know what we were going to do with this thing. So they were going to wake up and figure that out. But when they went out there, all there was a blood pile, and the animal was gone. And they were kind of baffled by that, but the only thing they could figure is that maybe the other ones came and grabbed it. Because they said there was no way that people could have moved it without a backhoe, and they would have heard that, you know? So their assumption was that these other animals that were vocalizing took this thing away. Because they did see a bloodline go towards the wood line by the barn where this thing would come out. But he only had about 40 foot of dirt, and then grass would start. So the bloodline stopped in the dirt, and then in the grass they seen like little bits of blood, but most of it was in the dirt, and it looked like it just got dragged off in that direction. So as weird as that was to them, that was the assumption. But after that incident, he said things actually calmed down. And I was kind of surprised to hear that. I thought maybe it would kind of ramp up. But he said it actually calmed down. There would be vocalizations and there was some knocking on the house and things like that. But he never saw another animal, and his wife never saw another animal staring at his daughter from the wood line ever again. And the violence towards the livestock in that area seemed to subside. So they figured maybe that the animal that was doing most of the stuff was this one. That's all they could really figure. But that guy never had a problem again. He did say that a couple of years later he did hear of another person on that house having some serious problems, but it was more like a secondhand type story. He wasn't really able to confirm or deny that. And things on his house just kind of remained the same, you know, the vocalizations and nothing really ramped up. It was just kind of status quo. And then, you know, I think it was about 7 years later, they ended up moving to Florida. But that was really it. So when I went up there, I wasn't really expecting to hear that, but that's what he said.
You hear that a lot with a lot of different encounters. You hear that, and not every encounter one gets shot, but the ones that tend to were encounter stories to where people do come forward and say, "Hey, I shot it." It's interesting because you usually hear that the body disappears, or I've even heard of encounters to where people say others came out, grabbed the body, and then took off with it. In an animal that large, you wouldn't think that what's going to move it besides a crane. You know, it's kind of like what your neighbor said. Well, we shot it, and then we weren't really expecting it. We didn't have a plan beyond that point.
They said they kind of laughed at each other, like, okay, well, now what the hell do we do? You know? Yeah. They weren't even sure if they wanted to tell anybody. They didn't know how the state felt about it, you know, or even what the hell really it was. Like I said, they called it a wood ape, but what the hell is a wood ape?
Yeah, it's interesting that they use that term. I'm curious on the gentleman, the neighbor that used to go and visit. Did he ever come forward and did he ever say why he wasn't upfront and honest from the beginning, saying that these were wood apes instead of saying, well, it's just guys down the street? Did he ever say why?
Well, yeah, you know, that's a good point, Wes. Sorry about that. I did ask that. I'm like, well, why didn't you just tell me? Like, what do I care if it's a wood ape? You know what I mean? Like, I would have been more comfortable with that, I think, than some weirdos with guns running around. But he had said that they noticed when they first started moving on to this farm was probably when I was about 1 year old. And before they moved to this farm, they lived kind of in the area where we lived. And like I said, there's not a lot of woods in that area. And what people do in that area is for the weekend they go down to the shore or something like that. Like, it's not like where you guys live, it's a hunting area. Everybody's outdoors. You know, it's fishing. It's more woodsy. And this is more of a suburb. So they didn't even really know about these animals either. And he said when they first got to that property and started to have experiences and see them, you know, needless to say, they were stunned, you know. And they said that when they started telling people, because like I said, most of their friends were from the area where I was from, when they were calling back to the area, talking to old friends and saying, hey, you know, we got these upright walking, hair-covered things out here. They said they were taking a lot of ridicule. You know, like people were like, yeah, okay, man. Especially here in Jersey.
Yeah.
And he said, like, people would just ride them. They'd have people over and, you know, for the night, and they were hoping, like, oh, man, hopefully something happens, like, prove it. And he said nothing would happen, you know. There'd be no vocalizations, nothing. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, so where's those wood apes, idiot? You know what I mean? Like, just ride them.
Yeah, I guess I can understand that. So they could just kind of came up and brushed it off and said it was something else. I bet a lot of that goes on. I bet a lot of that goes on around the country.
Yeah, I bet it does. Because really, who's going to believe you?
Right.
I mean, it seems like everybody that comes out eventually gets attacked.
Oh, yeah.
I think you could attest to that. And everybody that else has come out can attest to that. And a lot of guests that you've had on your show that have said, like, you know, like some of the people in Texas that have videos that could, you know, who probably legitimize the subject at least, they know that even though their videos are great, they're still going to get crap for it. I even think one of the guys that know Bob that you had on said that. When you asked him, like, why don't you release this stuff? And I'm sure there's people that have better videos and pictures, and they probably don't even come on shows like yours because they just don't want to deal with it. And I don't blame them.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame it's like that. You know, I mean, everyone should be free to come forward and say, hey, I saw this without, you know, being attacked, without, and it's kind of a shame. I mean, it really is kind of a shame because I think it should
be above that. But, you know, there's just that mainstream media mindset. Like, if I don't see it on TV, it ain't real. And if I see it on TV, then it is real. And it's pretty easy to brainwash people, and that's going on.
Yeah, and so
when I found out what these things were, and I wanted to tell people, you know, and I did, and I got ridiculed, but I really didn't care. I said, listen, you don't believe me? I don't give a damn, you know. I'll drop you off over there. You gotta check it out, you know. And, you know, I spent a lot of time thinking back on, like, so wait a minute, those were wood apes. Like, what the hell, you know? And I remember, like, thinking, like, how dumb was I to believe the story? And it did sound, you know, then you start really thinking about it. You're like, wow, that did sound weird, you know? And then you're thinking, like, I was thinking, like, how weird those things are. Like, what the hell are they screaming about? You know what I mean? Like, that's some strange behavior, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's very primate-like behavior. And I can imagine, too, in your mind, if you thought it was a bunch of guys out in the backyard, you know, back out in the forest, you'd think, man, these guys are high on something, or, you know, they sound like a bunch of animals out there running around. So from that point on, is that really what got you interested in?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. After that conversation, I researched it as much as possible and, you know, still do. And, you know, I'm like everybody else. I try to watch the shows on TV, even though they're pretty much hilarious. But I was fortunate enough to find your show about a year ago. And I joined, and it's been awesome. And I love this show's the best, and you get some great guests that are brave enough to come on, and some of the stories have been amazing. Like the guy's dirt bike broke down. I mean, there's a lot, you know. But, no, it's been great, and it's just piqued my interest even more.
Yeah, it's interesting when people think of New Jersey, they don't think, as you and I were talking the other day, Lou, people look at New Jersey and you don't, at least from the West Coast, people don't think that it's a forested area. You know, we kind of think of it, or maybe it's just me, I think of it as a concrete jungle, but
No, you're right.
it's not. A lot of those areas up there, are pretty heavily wooded. Even, what is it, northern New York?
Oh, upstate New York, yeah.
Yeah,
outside the city.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of wooded areas, and it's beautiful up in that area. Pennsylvania, all those areas are very beautiful. It's not quite the concrete jungle that you think of.
Right, yeah. Well, in Jersey, it's, there's 2 counties in the northwest that are very, like I said, they don't even look like New Jersey. If I took somebody, that's been living in my area and drove them up there, they'd be like, where the hell are we, you know? It really does look like the West Coast, like Oregon and Washington. But it's just really those 2 northern counties. And then in the south, there's the Pine Barrens, which I hear they're down there too. I don't, you know, I can't confirm that. I know that there's been sightings, I should say. But other than those 2 areas, you're right. It is really just, you know, a concrete jungle to say, you know, unless you're at the beach.
The other thing I think is interesting too about the story is I've always heard situations like this where people are having problems on a property and they shoot one. Now their problems are tenfold. But you know, I'm kind of with you on that. Maybe they shot the one that was actually causing all the trouble.
Yeah, and I honestly thought it was like when he was telling the story, I anticipated or assumed he was going to say, oh man, after we shot that, all hell broke loose, you know? And I think they were the guy was kind of expecting that because, he said he was going to have some people stay the next few days, but he said it really kind of subsided after a while, and that's what they assumed. Like maybe this one would stray from the pack and just cause trouble for one reason or another. Or maybe he even thought maybe his sons messed with it. And I said, like, what do you mean maybe his sons messed with it? And he said, like, his sons were kind of like smart. I said, like, when those things would scream, they'd mock them and scream. And they'd run around with their little 22s. Maybe they put a shot at it or something. Who the hell knows, you know?
Yeah, and he said that it used to watch his daughter from the wood line.
Yeah, he'd see it in the woods, or he'd get a call from his wife, or when he got home from work, his wife would say, you know, that damn thing was watching her play again from the wood line, and they just kept moving her closer to the house, but they said you could sure as hell look out and see the thing watching from the wood line, and actually I remember him showing me a Polaroid that the wife had taken of the thing in the tree line. And that was how I got to see what they kind of looked like.
What did the Polaroid look? I mean, what did you see when you looked at the picture?
To me, it looked like the Patterson film, that thing in that photo, because the only thing you could really see is from like the shoulders up, because it was behind some shrubs behind to the right side of the barn as you're looking, and so you could see kind of like the shoulders and up. And to me, that Patty, when she turns and looks at the camera, and you get that real wide mouth and the way the hair was on the face.
Right.
It looked like that, but I would say bigger, definitely bigger, wider. But that same giant feet, like that, you can see how big the mouth is on Patty. I remember seeing that on this thing.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I was going to do a little bit of research on this, is you said in your area they call them old red eyes, and as you and I talked about, you know, I've never seen the eye shine. I've never seen. I wish I would, but I've never seen the eye shine. I've seen eye shine from lots of other animals, but not from these things. Why did they call them old red eyes?
Well, I started as I got interested in the subject, and you know, as I'm older now, and you start doing research on the internet, I was actually hoping one night to go back up there, and I mean, the area was completely different from the last time that I was there. But I wanted to go up on the Kittatinny Mountains and just camp out one day and just see if I hear anything, you know. And I know it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but so what I started to do was just look for recent sightings. And all these older newspaper articles started popping up when I was doing searches, and they would say, old red eye spotted again. And I started reading that. I guess some of the farmers I guess it was back when I was going up there, like in the 70s and 80s, and even before the 90s, and probably even before the 70s, I guess these farmers would spot, they'd hear a noise or go out with a flashlight and catch that red glow from the light of the flashlight off their eyes. So they started getting a nickname of Old Red Eye. And it was in newspaper article after newspaper article.
Yeah, and historically speaking, that area has a lot of encounters. If you look through old newspapers, that whole area actually has a lot of encounter stories through there. But they have a name for it. That's a frustrating part when you try and look up stuff. If you look for Bigfoot, you won't find anything.
Doesn't always come up, right?
Yeah, or Sasquatch, it doesn't come up. And it's the same problem down south, like Chicken Man or what's another one? Boogers.
Cowman.
Or Cowman, or
smell like a cow.
Yeah, or Corn Man. Or Bushman. So it's like you kind of have to know what the locals call it in order to look stuff up. So that's interesting. I'd like to, if you find anything interesting, will you send it over? I'd love to.
Absolutely. I'll keep in touch with you, Wes, and if I see anything like that, a video I was telling you about or whatever, just keep in touch, and it's always fun to talk to you, man.
I appreciate it.
Keep up the good work, and don't let bad eggs get to you, and you do a great job, man. You treat people with respect, and I know there's a lot of people, including myself, that really love this show, man. It's a big part of our lives, so just appreciate you doing it, Wes.
Welcome to the show, everyone. I just want to take a second. Thank you, Wes, for having me back on the show, and I'm excited. It's been a while since I've been on, man, so I feel a little rusty, but we're going to go through it tonight and talk about some of the previous shows and kind of kick back and have a good time.
Cheers, man.
Yeah, cheers. Cheers, you two, man. This is, you guys have been doing a great job since I've been gone, and,
well, you mean me.
Well, you. That's what I meant. But, yeah, we're going to go over some of the previous episodes, and we're just going to kind of kick back. So if you folks want to, hang out, listen, this is going to be a good time. It's going to be just, it's going to be fun.
Before we actually get started, why don't you tell the audience what you've been up to, and then I'll tell you my story from the dealership.
I can do that. My part's kind of boring, but yeah, I haven't been up too much. Too much. I've been working a lot. Started a new job. Had a baby. Starting to crawl now, so I've been busy, and that's why I haven't really been here. And I apologize to you for kind of bouncing on you and bailing on the show, but let's do this.
My nephew Colin, he's a good-looking kid. Makes me wonder if he's actually yours or not, but he's a pretty good-looking kid. Yeah. No, but I'm glad you're back for this episode.
Mm-hmm.
What's funny is is I was in the car dealership today, and I went into, this isn't Bigfoot related, but I went into the car dealership, the top part of my, $100,000 Hummer.
Right.
The lights came off when I was on a road trip. And so I went into the dealership to see what it would cost to get that fixed. So I walk in, and there's this guy in there getting his car detailed. Mm-hmm. And I wish I wouldn't have told you the story, just so you'd bust up lower on there. But I go in there. I know you haven't seen the movie The Other Guys. Mm-hmm. But for the audience out there who has seen it, it totally reminded me of the movie The Other Guys, because there's a scene in there. Well, let me back up. So I'm talking to this guy at the counter, and I'm trying to figure out how much it's going to cost to get those lights fixed. And this guy comes in, and he got his car detailed. And there was I don't remember what the price was. It was like a special they were running. And this guy walks in, and I'm overhearing the conversation. The guy's like, well, it's going to be a little bit more than the special. And the guy's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, let me tell you something about your car, fella. Yeah. He goes in there, and he's like, I think an Indian restaurant was actually throwing their garbage into the back. Some schoolgirls, I think, had their periods for the first time in the back seat. And the guy's like, no. He's like, I don't want to hear this. And he's like, no, you're going to hear it. He's like, I think that, there was a letter in the back that said, thanks for the F-Shack from Dirty Mike and the Boys.
I want to stop and apologize for my brother's actions right at this point. I want to say. Anyways, go ahead, man. Anyways.
But here's a clip from the movie. This is basically the conversation I was overhearing.
You find anything?
Yeah, we found a lot of stuff. Somebody took a carp and jammed it into the air filter.
Why?
We found a snake that killed himself. I believe there's an Indian restaurant that's dumping its garbage in the back seat as well. I'm not sure this is shit. We're going to run it down the lab and do some tests, but I'm 85% sure this is shit. Placenta blew out all over the back window there. Thought it was clam chowder. Wasn't clam chowder. Thought it was yogurt. Was not yogurt. What I'm pretty sure is an infestation of either pubic lice or chiggers. We looked it up in a book, but nobody could figure it out. There's shit on that, watch out. Some inner city girls came by and...
You don't need to go on.
No, I'm going to tell you, they got their periods for the first time all over the back seat. They found your CD collection and they used it as toilet paper. Smell my fingers.
I'm not going to do that. Smell it. I'm not going to do that.
What is that? Someone started a community garden in there, so that's a positive thing. Thanks for the F-Shack. Love Dirty Mike and the boys.
So that's pretty much what happened. That's pretty much...
You're going to play the little F-Shack and all that.
That's pretty much how it
This
went
is
down.
from F-Shack from Mike and the boys.
Dirty Mike and the boys had
Dirty Mike and the boys.
They're like, you're not getting the special. We had 3 employees quit over your vehicle, sir.
Oh gosh. It went from a $199 special to like, you know what? This car's freaking totaled, man.
Just turn it into your insurance company.
Yeah, just turn in the insurance.
You know, it's funny. I was posting on the website about you coming back for this episode. Mm-hmm. Jay Carlson, he said, "That's great. The voice of reason returns." When the hell did you become the voice of reason?
I'm not quite sure, but hey, you know what? What was his name again?
Jay Carlson.
Jay Carlson. You're the man, dude.
Yeah,
you're the man. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know where that quite came from, but yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're not the voice of reason.
Yeah. Not so much.
But I was asking people about their favorite episodes, and there were so many episodes. You know this from doing the show. People will ask us about certain episodes, and I'm like, did we do a show on that? You know what I mean? It's like, I don't remember. You're talking about what? Someone was on the show, and they said what?
Yeah.
I just can't remember all the different episodes. I just can't remember. There's a few that stand out, but...
Well, that's because you drink too much.
That might be it.
That could be it. That's an option. No, but I know what you mean. There are a lot of people have said, "Oh, well, this is my favorite episode. I remember when you said this, and I remember said that." And we have normal lives like normal people, and from day to day, and we do the show, and I don't remember every episode either. As soon as they kind of mention it and give me a heads up, I remember the show and I remember what the feelings were on the show. So. I do take that to heart because a lot of, we've had some pretty heated conversations on some of these shows.
Yeah.
And, I appreciate everybody's feedback, man. They come back and tell us what their favorite ones were. They might not be my favorite ones. And, we've had a little bit of differences on some of the conversations that we've had with, some of the other hosts. But, anyways, yeah, it is what it is. And I'm glad to be back.
Edit.
Edit.
Yeah, no, it's, what's crazy is I remember when we first started doing this and how, it used to drive me nuts. And a lot of the old shows, I don't even know, honestly, a lot of the older shows are starting to fall off. Like Blog Talk's kind of screwed me out of the, like episode 2, episode 3, episode
the whole
4.
archive thing.
Like the old archive, back when you and I first started. And so it's hard to go back and try and dig those up because they're falling off an archive and I need to throw them up on a drive so that I don't lose them through Blog Talk. One of the things that used to drive me nuts, and actually makes me laugh now, but at the time it drove me nuts, is we would be doing a show, the chat room. Mm-hmm. God, I hated the chat room. The chat room was like just a pain in the ass to deal with because people ask questions in the chat room. You're trying to have a conversation with someone over the phone. And I remember I'd go, well, what do you think, Woody? And I'd hear,
yeah. And
he'd look up and go, huh? What?
What are we doing?
But that's classic. Those are classic stuff that people remember on, I hate to say the show.
We're just getting started, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you expect? We're trying to multitask, and I'm not a very good multitasker anyways.
Yeah.
And, it was hard.
You're in charge of the chat. Yeah.
I was in charge of the chat, pretty much running the whole show. I did everything. You didn't do much.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. It's true. Yeah. Just trying to get a grasp for after our encounter, trying to get an idea of what the hell's going on, like what the hell is this whole thing about, right. And trying to hear different people's experiences. And we had a lot of crazy people on there in the beginning. I hate to say that, but I mean, there was a lot of people who and I'm not going to name names, but I'm saying there was people that we had on where they're like, yeah, this is my 120th encounter, and I feed them grapes every night. And I was like, what? You know what I mean? I was just like, what? You feed them grapes? And they're like, oh yeah, we gift. And I never got the gifting thing. I'm like, you guys exchange presents like it's Christmas? And like, oh yeah, we exchange presents. And it's almost like they would name him like Big Harry. Yeah. I was like, you named him Big Harry? You know, and so it was trying to weed through some of the BS to try and get down to some of the meat and potatoes.
Well, we were still learning too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We were in the whole learning process. We were fairly new. We just had our encounter, and people that call in had several questions, and you and I had equally as many questions because we were fairly new, but
with zero answers for anyone.
We had zero answers. I don't even know why people were actually listening to our show even to this day, but I'm glad they did.
Yeah, it was really fun when, because the show's blown up to this crazy, its own monster. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I always still think of this being like a small show. It's crazy because when it blows up, you have either people love you or they hate you. And there's just weird ego in the Bigfoot community. And I never understood the ego. I honestly never got the ego. A lot of these guys run around and they think they're curing cancer. And I've always, I've tried to talk to some people in the Bigfoot community. Not everyone, but you try and talk to some people in the Bigfoot community. And I try and explain to them, hey, we're not curing cancer here, man. What's the deal with the ego? So it's weird because what the show's become, I don't think I really anticipated. It was really, really fun when we had like 20 listeners. You remember how fun it was when we had like 20 people that listened to the show and we knew all 20 listeners by first name. Yeah. And it was just a blast. It was just and now, and it's still a blast, but I'm saying it's harder to have that connection with the audience because, I could show you my email right now, and it's just ridiculous. I almost need like 2 or 3 people just answering emails. It's kind of crazy, you know what I mean? You have another drink there?
I was thinking about pouring one.
No, let's do a little.
Want to do another cheers here?
Yeah. Why not?
That's good to see you, man. I miss you, bro. I really do. I miss you a lot.
I appreciate it.
We haven't spent a lot of time together. We've both been busy and kind of went separate ways there for a little bit, but it's good to see you.
Yeah. I appreciate it. That's the alcohol talking.
It is the alcohol. But
as soon as you sober up, you'll hate my guts again.
Yeah, I still hate you, but at least it's doled at this point. No, but I understand, man. It was kind of a whole different beast. It was a whole different beast when we kind of started. It was like, it was on a more personal level. People called up. Not that it's not now. Because, you do take I haven't been on the show, but you do take everybody's story in consideration. And you talk to them about it, and that's good. But it was a little bit different. It was on a small base, kind of how you have like a family-based operation, and then you have like freaking Costco.
Right.
You know what I mean? You have the small guy little store down the street, and then you have Costco. And that was kind of the difference. And it's kind of grown, and that's a good thing. We got more listeners, more people, and I'm very appreciative of that. Not that I'm not. But it's kind of hard to, there is a lot of crazies out there. It's hard to weed through it. You know what I mean? And, I don't know. You guys have done such a good job since I've been gone. And, honestly, I haven't listened to every show. I haven't had a chance to, but I am trying to catch up on a lot of the shows and,
there's more on the internet than just porn.
Not for me. Edit. No, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
No,
it has changed. Once you start and it becomes bigger, it's a whole different beast altogether. And I'm kind of glad to sit down with you tonight. I'm excited about it, and we're going to go over some of the past shows, and I feel a little bad because I've been so busy. I haven't really had a chance to keep up with y'all, but I'm sure we're going to cover some good stuff tonight.
Yeah, there's been some really good encounters that we've had. I wanted to go off some of the members on what they... Let's see if I can pull it up here.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Has your opinion from our encounter... And this might be a question a lot of people could ask you. If they could sit down and talk to Wes Germer right now, they might ask you this question, so I'm going to ask you this. You're kind of a celebrity, then.
I don't know about that.
I don't know about that either. But anyways, so the question would be, has your opinion changed from... Remember that night when we were out there and everything happened?
Yeah.
Has your opinion changed from what happened that night and whatever this creature is to today? Because you've talked to thousands of people. You've talked to thousands of people, more people than I have. And you and I haven't really sat down and talked about much about this topic lately because we've been so freaking busy, right? Mm-hmm. How do you feel about it today? What's changed from today, from day one when you and I had our encounter? I know I caught you off guard a little bit.
Let me take a sip of my drink here.
Yeah. Is it different?
I don't think that it's changed a whole lot. See, so when we first started the show, we had a lot of flute players on. A lot. And they would say it was and here's the thing that used to drive me nuts. We had these people on. And our listeners who have been listening to the show since day one will know what I'm talking about. People who are listening like the last year probably have no idea what I'm talking about. When we first started, my opinion of what these things was it was a wild animal. Flat out, I thought these were a wild animal. I thought it was some form of primate. And I thought it was a primate, in my mind, that had the mentality of a chimpanzee. And people think of chimpanzees, in little costumes dancing around at the circus and blah, 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 blah. And I know that's not the case. Chimpanzees are probably one of the most vicious primates you can come across. They'll rip your head off and not think twice about it if they're pissed, if you catch them in the right mood. And that was my impression of that night. An overgrown monster, giant. But my impression at the time was the way they acted reminded me of a chimpanzee. Very aggressive. Well, let me take that back. That night, I didn't know what we ran into. I really had no clue what we ran into. And I didn't have an explanation for what we ran into. I think that's why we called them monsters.
Yeah, because you did. Because we hadn't really followed this whole Bigfoot thing at all.
Yeah.
And so when we ran into that night, what is this?
It's like, what the hell is this?
Yeah. What the hell just happened?
My opinion of it really hasn't changed a whole lot. I still think we're dealing with a wild animal that's a primate out there running around. And I think that you and I were at the wrong place at the wrong time. Flat out, wrong place, wrong time. And what used to actually drive me nuts is a lot of these flute players who absolutely hate this show. I get hate mail on a daily basis from all of them. And some of the emails, I should read some of the emails tonight and make you laugh. I get some crazy emails. If you're not pissing someone off, you're probably not working hard enough in life.
You're not doing your job.
Right. And that's kind of how I take it. I take it with a very small grain of salt. If I'm not pissing someone off, and if someone out there isn't jealous, if someone out there doesn't have the ego, I'm probably not working hard enough at this. Yeah. And so you take it with a grain of salt. But what used to drive me nuts is they'd say, well, you and your brother must have done something to set them off. And I'm like, BS. We didn't do squat to set these things off. They came in on us. We didn't come in on them. Well, let me ask you this. What was your favorite episode? What was your favorite? Is there one episode that stands out in your mind? And if you don't have one that stands out, I'll tell you the one that stands out for me. But is there one episode that stands out?
I actually have a couple. I have 2 episodes. They were very, very early when we started doing this, and it was just you and I. It was me, you, and Betsy.
Old Bets.
And it was Bets. And one of them is, I'm not sure, was it episode 3 when we told our encounter? God, I felt horrible for even asking.
I think it was
there.
4, but we didn't number them at that time.
Okay, but anyways,
but I think it was 4.
We had, when we told our encounter, we took some questions, and it felt, for me, it was really nice to get it out there and talk to other people. Not only was the show for people calling in and telling us stories, but it was a relief for me to talk to other people about the same topic. So, right then and there, I felt better. It was warm, fuzzy. One of my favorite shows. Probably, and this is going to sound really bad. Mm-hmm. There was a couple episodes when we really bashed on Rick Dyer.
Yeah.
I enjoyed those. I enjoyed those shows. Not very informational, but it was fun.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And a lot of those I try to stay away from now because when I listen to the show, and I hate listening to my own voice, I hate listening to, and you can relate to this, I absolutely hate listening to my own voice. Rick Dyer, you know how many drunken emails I got from that guy?
Oh, a lot.
A lot.
I saw some of them.
Yeah, I got a lot of drunken emails from him. But the show's changed. Like, I really want to stay away from... So here's where the show changed. We went from talking to researchers, because that's all who we... I'll tell everyone a secret about the show that probably no one else knows at this point. We couldn't get guests in the beginning. It was a struggle. And who we got was, quote-unquote, Bigfoot researchers. And I used to cringe. In the beginning of the show, we struggled to get people to come on the show. And the only ones that we could get to come on the show were Bigfoot researchers. Of course. Because, any chance they get on the show, they'll jump on. And that's all we could get. It really wasn't until the modern episodes, till about episode 10. In fact, I remember the first guy that we had on that actually had a real encounter. It was episode 10. And it was a hunter. Remember, he was out hunting. He never really saw anything, but he heard vocalizations. He heard chatter. He heard, and I can play it for you here in a second, but and that was the first guest we actually had on the show.
And, the car ended up being my brother, my girlfriend's brother-in-law. And, he was in camp with us initially Saturday and Sunday. He'd left Sunday. He had talked to Angela, and she told him what happened, and he had to come see for himself. And so he came into camp. I explained everything to him, and by now I'm so exhausted. I'm tired. I haven't slept, and the stress, and so I'm trying to get some sleep. I'm not hearing anything yet, and I remember Mike asking me. He says, what time did this happen last night? And I says, what time is it? I think he said 9:30 or something like that. And I said, and jokingly, I told him he's late. And I started dozing off. By that time, Mike shakes me again. Robert, did you hear this? Did you hear this? Listen. I'm listening, and you can hear movement down on the other side of the hairpin again. But now you're hearing what I called, at that time, I called it gibberish. They were chattering. It was talking. The other thing that was really peculiar about this is I was telling Wes that when this thing was talking, I'm not sure if it was, you heard a clicking sound, but I don't know if it was clicking from its tongue in cheek or if it was clicking like stones together, if that makes sense. And it had an intense voice. It wasn't that it was overly loud or anything, but it was intense, a very strong voice, if that makes sense. And, as soon he would, I'm going to try, I don't know if don't laugh at me, but I'm going to try to mimic a little bit of kind of what I was hearing. And it sounded almost like a, and with clicking going on while he was doing this. I thought it was like, another way I described it was like somebody speaking Russian backwards, if that made sense too. And,
Right.
And as soon as he stopped, another one would pipe off, right, about probably 20, 30 yards up from him. And he would respond to that. And then a third one would put in his 2 cents. And so we were semi-surrounded by these things. And they were just on the other side of the road. They couldn't have been no more than 30 yards from us. I imagine they were even closer. I'm just saying they couldn't have been any further than that. They seemed to stay stationary. Occasionally you'd hear stuff move around, but I didn't feel so threatened. It was intense. It was incredible to hear what I'm hearing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mike would, then it shut down, and Mike stayed, he was just awake, like, he was my sentry. I kept, once it slowed down a little bit, I would doze off. And then Mike would wake me up again. You got to hear this. You got to hear this. And we'd listen to the stuff again. And this went on there was at one point Mike wanted to leave. He couldn't handle it anymore, and he wanted me to actually shoot warning shots through my tent. I thought, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. I didn't feel threatened enough to shoot, but scared enough to where I didn't dare. And I don't know what's going on, and I don't know what this is. What if it's people? You know what I mean? I don't want to shoot somebody, and I don't know what I'm shooting at. I'm not pulling the trigger. After a while, he suggested we leave, and that he would hold the flashlight. We could, and I'd take the guns, and he'd get us to the car. And I thought, I'm not leaving, Mike. I says, if they come across the road, you wake me up. Wake me up. If you hear anything on that road or come across the road, please wake me up. Then it's going to be a different story. But they never did, but they stayed there till almost daylight the next day.
And then from then on, it caused this domino effect of people that were willing to come forward and talk about it. But those early days, man, it was a struggle to get.
It was rough.
It was tough to get someone on the show.
It was rough because they weren't sure, because you had so many people that have gone on other shows that were shredded, that were taken apart. Why this? Why that? Where was this? Where was the moon at the time that you doing it? Where did this happen? But anyways, they were shredded apart, and you and I didn't really do that. No, we soaked it in. Soaked in the information, took in the knowledge. And I think that's what made the difference, man. I really do.
We had fun with things, like taking shots at Tom Biscardi when he was drunk on his show, and some of the early people remember the Most Interesting Man.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
There is a new phenomenon going on in the Bigfoot world. It's called getting rigged. It's where you go on your own show, trashed, and act like a moron. There are 4 stages to getting rigged. Stage 1, act like a fool.
His reputation is expanding faster than the universe. He once had an awkward moment just to see how it feels. He lives vicariously through himself. He is
Mr. Tom Biscardi. Good evening, Tom. How are you tonight?
That's me. Turn me loose. That's our hour, brother, and we are ready to rock and roll. Hell yeah. I'm feeling good. How are you feeling, brother?
I'm feeling good there, Tommy. Sound like you've had a sip of wine.
Isn't that beautiful? I gotta tell you guys, before you go to bed at night, have a little toddy for the body, and before you know it, you'll be knocked out. And I'll tell you what, it'll cruise you through the night. It'll make you feel mellow, yellow, jello. Oh, baby. And that's the reason why. It makes yourself feel good.
Stage 2, anger.
Oh, they're saying that somebody now in the near future is going to get to see or find Bigfoot and bring it to the front because saying, hey, man, there's something to this because there's so many sightings around this country and the work that Dr. Ketchum is doing. Melba Ketchum, if you had any decency about yourself, you'd return my samples and all the other samples that you've taken from people.
With stage 2, the individual who is rigged is unable to take any sort of criticism. Example, Tom, you shouldn't binge drink. It's bad for your health, and you look like a fool.
I've been doing that for over 40 years. What else is new?
Stage 3, incoherent. The individual who is rigged is unable to put together a coherent thought or spoken word.
And that, great. Remember, I don't know if you guys ever remember Friday, when that big guy, he says, he got knocked the blank out.
Stage 4, pass out. Just a little commentary here. Melba Ketchum, will you... Wait just a second, everyone. I want to set the mood here. Melba Ketchum, will you please return the scat samples that Tom Biscardi sent you? He would like his scat returned to him. For the love of Christ, woman, you're driving him drinking.
And that wasn't meant to be mean-spirited. It was more or less fun. It was like, hey, Tom Biscardi, you got trashed on your show. We're going to poke fun at you because you were hammered on your show.
I'm not so sure everybody was upset about that.
Yeah, with Tom Biscardi, though, he's an easy target. But it wasn't meant to be mean-spirited. It wasn't meant to be...
No, it was not.
It was more or less meant to just make fun of the situation. It wasn't meant... Never once did I think, let's tear this guy apart.
Yeah.
It was more or less just for fun. Just, here, you got hammered on your show, we're calling you out on it.
Yep.
Type thing. Looking back, those were some of the funniest moments. And I spent a lot of time on that stuff, man. Hours. I had no clue what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And, I spent so much time on that because I wanted the show to be entertaining. I wanted the show to be fun. And I think over time I started to realize that people who have encounters, they're not looking for fun. They're not looking for funny. They want it to be serious, which I understand because, like with our encounter, I wanted it to be, it was serious. It was serious to us. And so we started to back away from some of that stuff. And then we brought Will on. Boom, boom, boom. And, but I remember we had this guy on, and I'll talk about other encounters. Did you ever hear the episode with Ray the Spaceman?
I did. No, I can't say that.
I'll play it for you in a second. But Ray the Spaceman, I love this guy. He is so convinced how he feels about... Well, here, I'll play an example for you. Hey, Ray, it's Wes. I talked to you earlier?
Yeah.
Will, you on the line?
I'm here, yes.
Go ahead, Ray. Kind of explain to him the...
There are 10 species of Bigfoot here on Earth at this time. The smallest one is over in Australia, and they're about 3 foot tall, and they're crossed with the pygmies. And the white one is up in the Oriental area, the highest up, and that's the white Bigfoot. We've got 5 here in the United States. We've got the skunk ape, which is way down south, southern border. And they got 3 toes, and they're the darkest colored and a little shorter than the others. And we got the ones that are crossed with the Koreans down at China Lake. And those won't go because they don't have implants. Then they've hauled some that have been killed back east to Montauk, and they've been crossed with the reptoids. And the reptoids, the ones that got scales all over their body, and there's 2 of them pictured on the bottom of the website on godsmessengersfromheaven.com. And then we've got the silverbacks and another species, the Sasquatch. So there's about 5 different species here in the United States, and we've got a number of them up in Russia, and they've got pictures of them on the website in Russia. The only one that I've got a live picture of is Ye2, and she's the one on Buff Creek.
I'm curious. How did you come by this information?
I was seated here to open the door on the secrecy from the planet Meropia. Everybody else has either been killed, beat to death, or shot like Kennedy. We are the hybrids that are related, first generation, and our fathers are on Meropia, and our mothers are here on Earth. Originally, I came to Earth 540,000 years ago and built the Giza Pyramid. And my soulmate was the one that cut the blocks, and they were steaming hot when we put them in place.
Yeah, and you put them in place, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of curious. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
From the cutting table over to the pyramid installation, I had 4 servobots that guided them down into place. And they were shielded, even though they were mechanical. They still had to be shielded because those rocks, if you can imagine what power it took to cut rock.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
Half of the pyramid is underground. There's a crystal on the bottom, and 500 feet up, they leveled off, and then they came up to a point with the crystal on top. And there's a picture in the second book of it with the crystal on top. And then we built the Stonehenge and the Wall of Forever. And then we came over, which is now the United States, and built a round circle with holes around the edge, and that was the last part of it, and that was down in Florida. When Mart Bell was on, there was quite a to-do about some contractor wanting to tear that all up and put in a housing project, and unions came in and put a stop to it.
They're actually on the moon and Mars. Well, they actually travel.
There's no Bigfoot on the moon. There's Bigfoot on Mars, red Bigfoot, and there's Bigfoot in the Hollow Earth, the red Bigfoot there. And there's about 1,700 on Mars. And there's 10 species of benevolent life on Mars at all times. And whenever the Bermuda Triangle operates, it sends a ship or plane or whatever up to the moon. And the humans are transferred from the moon over to Mars. And they're reconditioned. They have new brain, new eyes, and whatever else. And then they're transported back to whatever homeworld they fit into. Either Radiant in Lyran or Meropia or Electrolia.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense. I know Will had a couple questions for you. Will, go ahead. Oh, maybe I lost him.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Her name was Leia. She was a princess with the Danish on each ear and Darth Vader drawing near. So R2D2.
That was Ray the Spaceman. I'll tell you something about Ray the Spaceman. This guy actually believes what he's saying. I don't think for one moment he's lying about anything. But what cracked me up is it entertained me. I was sitting listening to this guy and I was like, wow, this guy is really insane. It's entertaining. Like, this is the craziest stuff I ever heard. And what's funny is Will dropped off the line and I was like, hey, you got any more questions?
He's like, I'm done.
Yeah.
Well, I pretty much think everything he was saying was 100% true, to be honest with you. I mean, I've been to Europia.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Verizon doesn't go all the way there and it dropped off and the call dropped off, but that's crazy. I mean, that just kind of shows, that goes to show you some of the stuff we go through on some of these calls, you know, and a lot of the people a lot of the stories I take to heart. Some of them we get a lot of that too. So I don't think people really realize that how much time is involved.
Yeah, that's the thing. You know, for every person you hear on the show, I've talked to 10. Easy. Mm-hmm. I've talked to 10 people, and it's not as bad now because I think people realize that that's not really what the show's about.
Yeah.
So that's toned down a lot. But I just love that Ray guy, man. Like, I could not get enough of it. I was like, I could have sat there for 3 hours and just listened to this guy talk.
He was so serious about it.
Yeah, he was real serious.
He was dead serious. I think he could have passed the lie detector test, man.
Probably.
No. Yeah, that's actually, I'm sorry, that's the first time I ever heard that, and that's crazy. Will just dumped him, huh?
Yeah, he just hung up. He just had enough of it. But you know what? I liked it. I was like, this guy entertains me, and
you should have asked if he could visit sometime.
He lives in Gresham, which is just across the river.
Europia. I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's been there for He's been here for 500,000 years or something like that.
Yeah, he built the pyramids.
Him and Jesus are probably really close.
Yeah. But I liked him. I actually liked him. I thought it was entertaining, and he listens to the show. So Ray, if you're listening, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
But as far as the shows go that are most memorable. Let me pull up my notes here again. We'll go off of what listeners say. Oh, I guess we already answered it. Michael L., he wanted to know, I'd like a follow-up from both of you to your original encounter with any insights or observations you've gained over the 100 or so episodes, interviews, and 2 years of reflection. That's pretty much the gist of his question. And I think we already kind of answered that. Rich A says, oh, for crying out loud, this is so cool. The band is back together, even though it's just for one night. Zeppelin did it, and now you guys did it. I don't know if we're Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, we're not Led Zeppelin.
Looking forward to it. Oh, here's a good one. Papa Yeti. He said one of his favorite episodes is episode 90 with Bob Gimlin. It's a shame you weren't there for that one.
I wasn't there for that. Met Bob.
You want to tell the Bob Gimlin story? Because I tried to tell it.
I can.
And I almost edited the story to make it sound like it wasn't as bad as it was. Why don't you go ahead and tell the Bob Gimlin story about how we met Bob Gimlin at Beachfoot?
Okay, so Wes and I, we went to Beachfoot. Thank you everybody for inviting us to that. I appreciate that. It was our very first year, first time ever being there. Kind of like the celebrity Bigfoot world, you know what I mean? There was a lot of people there that were, I was kind of awestruck as far as the people that were there. And so Wes and I were just kind of sitting underneath the gazebo. Bob Gimlin walks by, and we strike up a conversation with him. I'm not sure I think you probably did, struck up a conversation with him. Actually, we didn't even really talk about Bigfoot right at first.
No.
Yeah, we were talking about his personal life, and his wife, and him and his horses, and just a super cool guy. I mean, he's a class act as good as it gets. We're sitting underneath the gazebo. People are cooking dinner. We're just kind of kicking back. We're having some drinks. So we're sitting there and we're talking to Bob Gimlin, and actually, I was talking to him first. That's what it was. I was talking to him first. Wes walks up, and Wes is a big guy. I don't know if everybody realizes how big Wes is. He's over 6 feet tall. He's 6'1". He's like 150 pounds. No, not really. He's more than that. But anyways, he's a big guy. Walks up. Hey, Bob, how you doing? How you doing, you son of a bitch? Good to see you, Slaps him on the shoulder. And, because Bob's kind of a good old guy. And I'm like, and Bob just finished a conversation with me after this. He was like, yeah, I had my shoulder broken. He was kind of telling me about a time when he was laying on the floor bleeding to death, and his wife had spoon-fed him for a while. Anyways, Wes walks up. He's like, how you doing? And Bob has this drink in his hand. It's actually a bottle of water. He wasn't drinking. It was water. And we're having this conversation, and I'm kind of looking at Wes, and I'm trying to give him the eye of like, hey, will you quit slapping this guy around? He's recovering from a major shoulder injury. And he's like, yeah, and he's kind of waving his bottle around, and he's telling us about being kicked by a horse, and he told us all sorts of stories. And Wes is like, yeah, you're just a tough guy, tough SOB, whatever he said. Water bottle drops another 6 inches. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how much longer is this shoulder going to hold up? You know what I mean? And I'm kind of trying to give Wes the hey, knock it off, And again, Wes is like, yeah, it's really good to see you. Wham! Just smacks him, in a friendly way. Water bottle drops a little bit. It's almost sitting on the counter, and it looks like he has no use of his arm anymore. So, and Bob keeps telling us about these other stories about being kicked by a horse, what did he do, break his ribs? I think he broke his ribs.
Broke his back.
Broke his back, that's what it was. He laid in his back. He was on his back for a long time. And I mean, the guy sounds like he's broke every bone in his body, so he is a very tough dude. And he slaps him again, and I'm just like, and we're having a conversation with him. Pretty soon the water bottle is pretty much, his arm is limp at this point. It's laying down. It was hilarious because I told Wes shortly after he paralyzed Bob.
Paralyzed. I physically assaulted him.
I think this is probably like a domestic violence at this point. And I'm like, no, time out, giving him the timeout signal. And I think Wes is like, let me get you a beer, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh my God, here we go. And so, Bob, he shrugged. Dude, believe it or not, he just shrugged that off, finished the conversation. He did ask for a beer right after that, though. I think it was the Dole the Pain, to be honest with you. So, class act, and Wes really didn't know,
In my defense, Bob Gimlin's an old man.
Yeah.
But Bob Gimlin, when you meet him, you think this guy's invincible.
Yeah.
And I had no clue that he had busted his shoulder, but when you meet the guy, you see this old tough cowboy. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this probably isn't a man that I'd want to mess with. I realize the guy's in his 80s, but he is one tough SOB. And it wasn't meant to be like, And I told that on that show with Bob Gimlin.
You did.
And I'll tell you another thing about Bob Gimlin that put Bob Gimlin on a whole different level for me. Right after the whole incident with Will.
Yeah.
And I come back to a burning house from Texas, and I have no clue what's going on. Mm-hmm. I literally had no clue what was going on. One of the first calls I got was from Shane Corson, mm-hmm. which meant the world to me. Mm-hmm. And Shane said, "Hey, I know everyone's out there bashing you. I want to let you know right off the bat, I'm not going to do that."
Who's Shane Corson? Just joking, buddy. Just joking, buddy.
And that meant the world to me.
Yeah.
Because he's the only person who called me and said, "Hey, I think this is BS, and I'm not going to play this game." And that really meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
The other guy was Bob Gimlin. And I got a call from him at like 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right after all this happened.
Right after all this happened. And Bob doesn't...
he doesn't talk on the phone, right?
No.
Yeah.
Bob doesn't do interviews.
So.
And, the story we should tell is about how we tried to get Bob Gimlin on the show one time.
I tried like hell to get him on the show.
Yeah.
I talked to his wife. I tried to talk to him.
You sweet-talked his wife.
I did, man. And I cut for a couple days straight. And I mean, good enough to where we had a pretty good relationship, but no
his
Bob.
wife was sweet, yeah.
No Bob.
And Bob didn't want to do it. And what's interesting is, right after this whole thing with Will happened, Bob Gimlin was the second phone call I got. Shane Corson was the first, but Bob Gimlin was the second. Yeah. And Bob Gimlin said to me, "Hey, all of this that's going on is all the same crap I went through with Roger Patterson. You get someone who has ego, you get someone, and it's just a cancer." And he gave me a lot of good advice off the air. And I won't go into it, but he gave me a lot of good advice off the air.
Right.
But what was interesting is Bob was so kind to me. He was so... It just meant the world to me, man.
Yeah. And he had your back on this.
And he asked me, he said, what can I do to help you? And I said, "Bob, I'd love to have you on the show." And he's like, "Well, I got to go out and feed my horses. How about if I call you back at 4 o'clock? And I was like, "Yeah, 4
And this is the guy where he already re-broke his shoulder. And
yeah.
He's ready to call you up and say, "Hey, man, everything's going to be okay."
Yeah, I physically assaulted this guy. Yeah. And, but it meant the world to me. And then when he came on, I hate to say I was a little starstruck, but I was a little starstruck. I was like, man, what am I going to ask this guy that hasn't been asked before? This guy's told his story over and over and over again. And what was interesting was the backstory that Bob told. And Bob went on to talk about the stuff behind the scenes you never get to hear from. Like Roger Patterson having someone fill in that said they were Bob Gimlin so he could make a buck. And Bob never made a dime off that thing. And most people don't realize they call it the Patterson film.
Yeah.
They should call it the Gimlin film because that film would have never happened. It was Bob's gas, Bob's trucks, Bob's horses. He paid for everything to get them down. He took time off work.
He guided them down in there.
Took them down there, and it would have never happened without Bob. And when he talk, and here's another thing that drives me nuts. People talk about the Patterson Gimlin film being fake. It doesn't make sense.
No.
And the reason why it doesn't make sense, if you listen to Bob, let's say they hoaxed Bob for a second, and everyone else was in on it except for Bob. Why do you give the guy who's not in on it the rifle? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the last guy you want to give the rifle to who's not in on the joke.
That's a good point.
Or in on the hoax. You don't give him the rifle because he might just cap someone.
Yeah.
And if it is a suit and guy running across the sandbar in a suit and Bob Gimlin's not in on it, you don't give him the rifle because he might just pick this guy up.
And he's probably a pretty goddamn good shot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, he's a good shot.
Yeah.
Probably some of the most memorable ones, and I'll get back to some of the comments on the website. The one that sticks out the most to me was the Siege of Hanabi.
Mm.
Please have someone contact us. This is no hoax. My brother is afraid for his family. This creature is getting bolder every time it returns. This thing is huge, walks upright, smells like musky urine, burned hair-type odor. He repeatedly comes back in the early morning hours after midnight and harasses us right before dawn. It has on more than one occasion tried to enter the home. We don't know where to turn. Everyone thinks we're crazy when we mention it. Please, we don't know what to do, but I know that something needs to be done.
The message went on to explain that the family was having problems over the past 2 years with one or more nuisance animals that were prowling around outside the home at night. The animals were stealing deer meat from an outside shed. The situation had escalated when the animals tried to enter the home. At one point, the father went outside to confront the animal. He got a good look at one and took a shot. He claimed it was running back into the woods. Whatever it wasn't alone. The family could hear chattering and screaming from the hills when the prowler was near the home. The situation escalated as the brothers started shooting from the porch at the creatures chattering on the hill.
I'll tell you a secret about the Siege of Hanabi no one else knows. I almost didn't air it. It almost never happened. And the reason why here's why.
Because I remember when you did the majority of it, that you and I were kind of working on that together.
Well, and the reason why I almost didn't air it. So I spent a lot of time on the phone with Mike Humphreys.
Yep.
And I remember I called you and I was like, hey, I got this guy Mike Humphreys on the phone. And I was explaining the Siege of... I don't think you and I had ever heard of the Siege of Hanabi. And as I was talking to him, I realized really quick, this guy really knew what he was talking about. You know, before our show, here's another thing about our show I'm proud of.
Yeah.
Before our show, no one ever talked about eye shine. They'd talk about glowing red eyes, or they'd talk about glowing yellow eyes, or glowing green eyes. And people would talk about these things having like LCD lights, which never made sense to me. I've never seen another animal that had eyes lit up like that running through the forest. And when I talked to Mike Humphreys, one of the things he said to me, and then it clicked right away. He said that it's not their eye shine and the color you get back is based on the light you hit them with.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he said that...
First time I ever heard of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, like, and it always turned me off because people would talk about, well, it had red eyes, or, well, it had green eyes, or, well, it had amber eyes. And no one ever had an explanation why their eyes were different colors.
Yeah.
And one of the things he said to me that he figured out right away was, if you hit them with a car light, like the headlamps of a car, it's going to come back red. If you hit them with the newer cars that have the different type of lights,
the blue or the white,
it's going to come back like a blue color or a yellow color in their eye shine. And he said he figured out really quick with the flashlights they were using, some flashlights that would come back red, like older flashlights. Some of the newer mag lights, it would come back kind of an amber color. And so he figured out really quickly that it had nothing to do with the animal. It actually had to do with the light you were hitting with.
Right.
And that's one of the things that really, really stuck out with me. The other thing when I talked to him, because I talked to him for almost 4 hours on the phone, and I begged him to come on the show. Absolutely. I mean, I got sloppy, man. I was begging him to come on the show. And
you're slurping on.
Oh, yeah. I was begging him to come on the show because I was like, this guy has such good information. This guy he had the hunting down, talking about them being ambush predators, and no one else was talking about that.
It was nailed. He had it nailed down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when I talked to Mike Humphreys, he was like, hey man, they're ambush predators. What? And he goes, let me tell you something about the wood knocking. He goes, one will stand at the top of a trail and wood knock or create a disturbance to push the game down the trail. Once the Sasquatch, or once the Sasquatch pushes the deer down the trail, they walk right into an ambush. And no one ever talked about that. But when he said that, it made sense to me.
Yeah, I remember that. It was one of the first, I don't know if it was one of the very first, but I will say it's one of the very first people that we talked to that everything he said made common sense.
Yeah.
Based on not only a hunting aspect, based on a Sasquatch aspect, based on the eye shine, based on everything he said. And when you put it all together as a whole, as a story, you're like, oh my God, why haven't I seen this before?
Yeah.
And he was I remember that. He was one of the very first guys that I was like, this is the real deal.
Yeah.
This is the real deal. And we've talked to some of these so-called researchers before, and I never heard this good information, information that he had.
No.
And that's really, I think, honestly, that was kind of a turning point in our show, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that was kind of a turning point from we need to talk to people that are more, that not only, I mean, we weren't really big on, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. We weren't really big on talking about just the researchers and the facts. We want to know what people think. Well, this is one of the first guys that came on the show, which was a real person, which had facts that blew the researchers away.
Yeah.
As far as I was concerned.
It's crazy too because you see it all the time now. People are like, well, it all depends on the light you hit them with.
Yeah. They're just regurgitating what he said.
Right.
You know what I mean? And not only regurgitating, but it does happen. People are out there, they're doing their research, and they're probably noticing it more. But really, you know what? He was one of the top guys that I remember that really kind of changed our focus on where we were going to go with the show.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mike.
I talked to this guy for almost 4 hours on the phone, and I never once got a sense.
That he was full of BS?
That he was full of BS.
Never once.
Never once.
In fact, I remember after we heard his, and this is a long time ago, man. This is quite a few years back. And I remember talking to him, and I was like, this is for real. And I was thinking about deer eye shine. I was thinking about, we've seen bear. You can go to cats, dogs, whatever, and they all were kind of that same yellow or the red eye shine. He had a whole different theory on it, and there was a reason why.
Yeah.
He actually gave an explanation why, and it made sense.
Yeah, even the hunting, all the way down to the hunting. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, too, is when you read the BFRO report, he was begging for help from the BFRO. Begging. Right. These guys were begging for help on just how to get rid of them.
I remember that. I do remember that.
Begging them for help. He was one of the first guys I ever heard say they shot one, and I believe him. I honestly believe that these guys shot one. I think they got to a point. I almost put you and I in the same, I could see you and I in the same situation of being harassed by these things and being like, enough. Mm-hmm. We're going to blast the next one we see. Enough. I've had enough of this crap.
That's flying, man.
Let's blast this thing. It even comes close to the house. let's blast the hell out of it. Yeah. And so I could relate to what he was saying with him and his brother. And then when he said that when they went out to retrieve the body, they got bum rushed by other Sasquatches that actually came out to get the body. And he's one of the first ones I ever heard say that. And now when I hear encounter stories, I had Lou on recently, and he talked about how they shot one. Well, they shot one out in New Jersey. And when we think of New Jersey, you think concrete jungle, but this is out in the forest area. They had shot one, and what was interesting is when you talked to them, they weren't sure what to do at that point after they shot it. He said it was about 9 feet tall and about 900 pounds. They didn't have a backhoe. They didn't have a crane. So they left it overnight. The next morning it was gone. It coincides perfect with what Mike says. Once you shoot one, they come and retrieve the dead one.
The body.
And I'll tell you another thing. I'm convinced they eat the dead.
Really?
I think they eat them.
So they're cannibals is what you're saying?
Yeah, I think they eat their dead. I really do.
I mean, I've heard that before.
I could be wrong.
That's the first time I've heard you say that.
I think they eat their dead. I really do.
Why?
I've always had that suspicion that they eat their dead.
Because I think you're so close to a race. I mean, I guess I just picture, like, me eating you. You die?
Yeah, these are wild animals, though, man.
Not that I want to eat you, brother.
Well, no. No, I had this guy on.
I mean, you're pretty hot. No,
no, I had this guy on one time, and he said to me...
I'm not so sure I buy that, but I don't know.
I have a hard time with them. They bury their dead. I just don't. I think they eat them.
They put them out to sea, like out on fire. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
But anybody that eats a dead corpse, there's something wrong with that person or that thing.
I don't think these are people.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
I'm just questioning your thought process, and that's all. I'm not saying you're wrong. I guess I don't understand that.
Let's just go with I'm right then.
Well, it's not. Okay, so tell me your theory on that. So they eat them.
Well, I've heard different encounters to where...
I mean, we eat fish and cows. I'm not real big on eating Sasquatch, but...
Yeah. No, I think that you'll see with a lot of chimps, they eat other primates. And they have no qualms about it. And I had a guy on... It was Bobby Hamilton. He talked about this encounter story that he went out to meet with this hunter who actually shot one. The hunter said it stumbled out to the sandbar, and he was going to retrieve the body. And 3 or 4 other ones came out. One came out, smashed it in the neck, broke its neck, and then 2 or 3 others came out and tore it apart and started eating it.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't know.
I'm right, is what you're saying.
I think you're delusional is what you are.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, you could be right, could be wrong. I mean, that could whole bit. We could spend an hour on that topic just alone, but
right.
I mean, like spiders lay eggs on the female spiders lay eggs on male spiders, and that's their dinner when they wake up. I'm not so sure that these type of animals do that. I don't know what they do with their dead. I'm not sure if nature takes care of them.
So I'm right, is what you're saying.
So they could put them in the river and watch them float out to sea. I don't know, but I can't agree with you on. I'm never going to agree that you're right, because I just like to argue with you more than anything. So I don't know, bro.
Yeah,
it's a good hypothesis. So
yeah,
so you're crazy, is what you're saying. I have a question for you, actually. When we very first started the show.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much more open-minded than you ever were.
Right.
So, I brought up the whole thing about paranormal. It sure seems like when Bigfoot's around, we see orbs, we see UFOs, unknown time travel, loss of time that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying Sasquatch is related to that, but it seems like they kind of coincide. One happens with the other, and they're close as far as like when things happen. You know what I mean? And I had brought that up on a few shows, or some of our very first shows, since the experience that you've gained and you've talked to numerous more people than I have. has your view on any of that changed? I mean, for instance, okay, I talked to you last weekend. You came over to the house. We were having a quick discussion. Yeah, you and I were having a discussion, and you were telling me about orbs. Mm-hmm. And so, for me to hear you talk about that back then, just this last weekend, I was kind of shocked and awe. And I've kind of been left out of the loop as far as where the shows have gone, what you've talked about. I've been busy, dude. You know what I mean? And where do you stand on that? What's your thoughts?
Here's what I think. I watched this presentation with Dr. J, who I think has gone way off the deep end. Yeah, go ahead and kick the mic there. That's fine. I'm sure the audience doesn't mind. Hope no one's wearing headphones.
You're a jerk.
So
hey, let me point out all the mistakes that my brother makes while we're doing the show.
I honestly think that, well, I'll come back to the orbs for a second. I think when someone says, and this is my own personal opinion, but I think I'll give you an example. I had talked to this one guy one time who said that Sasquatch had broken into his home. And I'm like, what? Really? He's like, yeah, Sasquatch broke it. And it was actually in New York. It was in Whitehall, New York. And I said, what? Sasquatch broke into your home? Yep, Sasquatch broke into my home. I said, well, tell me about that. Tell me what happened. So he starts going through the story. He lives on the upstairs. He heard his front door kick open. He heard this thing coming up the stairs. He wasn't armed. He grabbed a baseball bat. And as it came up the stairs, he was ready to pop this thing in the head. And then it disappeared. And when it disappeared, it started mind speaking to him. My comment right off the bat, okay, one of two things are going on here. Either A, he's crazy, which he didn't sound crazy, but either A, he's crazy, or B, he has some demonic activity going on. Flat out demonic activity going on. Because when you start lining up some of these paranormal stories about mind speaking, traveling through dimensions, on and on and on, you can almost parallel everything everyone's saying with people who are experiencing demonic activity in their home. Almost word for word. It's parallel to what they're saying. Do I believe some of that stuff goes on? Absolutely, I believe it goes on. Do I think it's Sasquatch related? No, I don't. I don't believe it's Sasquatch related. And I don't buy into any of this crap where people say, well, I followed this track line and then it just disappeared. And they jump to this conclusion of either A, it traveled through a wormhole. Yeah, or an alien ship came down and picked it up. That's a huge jump. You and I saw these creatures. Yeah. Jump. Clear. Easily. 50 to 60 feet. Easy. So I could see where footprints would tend to disappear, but it used to drive me nuts about Bill Lee. Like the guy, and I'm not saying this to bash him. I actually like Bill Lee. As a person, I think he's a really nice guy. But he'd always say to me, well, Wes, what do you think about these tracks that just seem to disappear? I'd say, well,
I think it's a reach.
Give me an example of one disappearing. Well, he just heard it second or third hand about these tracks disappearing. And then he would say, well, what about an open field where there's no place for it to jump off and blah, 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 blah. Well, show me. Show me what you're talking about and I'll buy into it. But even then, it's a reach. Are we talking, so you're saying an alien ship picked them up? I mean, you're just reaching for a strange explanation on when you really don't have an explanation for something like that. But when people start talking about these weird, like cloaking, either A, it's a mental, well, let me back up. I talked to a psychologist one time who's a huge fan of the show out of California. And she said to me, Wes, when if you get a person on the phone that actually seems like they are sane, and they have all their mental capacities, and they're not crazy, and they say they saw a Bigfoot cloak, she goes, let me explain the psychology behind that. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, there's a portion of your brain. She goes, have you ever been in a car accident and everything around you seems to slow down when you're in a car accident? I said, absolutely. I've been on my motorcycle. It's happened to me. I've been in car accidents. It's happened to me. She says, well, reality's not slowing down, but in your brain, everything's slowing down. Your brain's trying to process this traumatic event that you're in. And she said, if you get someone on the phone, she goes, I think most of these people are crazy, but there's a small percentage. If they say, hey, I saw something cloak, she goes, there's a portion of your brain when you're in a traumatic event where you're terrified. She said the brain will actually try to make the threat go away because you're freaking out at this point. So the brain tries to take away the threat. So when people say, well, it was there 1 minute, then all of a sudden it's gone, it didn't actually disappear. But what your brain's trying to do is protect. It's a protective mechanism that your brain's kicking in. I don't buy into the fact that these creatures are jumping in and out of dimensions, jumping in and out of portals. I just don't.
So what's so different from the paranormal to the demonic realm? What's the difference?
There is none, in my mind.
But you just said you believe that there is a certain portion that this is a demonic thing, but you don't believe in paranormal. I ain't trying to put you on the spot, but as a definition, what's the difference?
There isn't a difference. I think what people are experiencing. I'll give you an example. Dr. J talked about this portal opening up. And when he shined the flashlight on it, it closed. And then the guys would walk back up to this portal, it would open up, and there was these small little creatures with red eyes, and this portal would open up, the sky was red, blah, blah, blah. Let's just say for a moment these guys experience that. Let's say it's true and these guys experience that. In my mind, that's demonic. There's something else going on there. And here's why I say that. Here's an animal that lives in the woods, craps in the woods, and vocalizes like a wild animal. If it had the technology to run portals, if it had the technology, why is it coming here and crapping in the woods? Why is it making primate type sounds running around the woods? Why is it twisting trees? Why is it, I know a lot of people think that this is a Nephilim. If you read a lot of the ancient scriptures, if you read a lot of the ancient writings from the Sumerians, they talk about these giants, they talk about Nephilim, they talk about, these weren't wild animals. They were advanced with technology, and they weren't beasts of the field. Sasquatch seems to be more a beast of the field. And people talk about, like, let's take banging on houses, for instance. Some people talk about these creatures coming up at night and banging on their houses. They have that same problem over in Asia. They have that same problem over with primates doing this exact same crap that Sasquatch is reported to do. There's an incident, I want to say it was in India, where this family was just terrorized by primates coming up, banging on the house at night, vocalizing, scaring the crap out of this family, and trying to get into the house, but they couldn't figure out how to open the doors, but they would shake the handles. So when you look at a lot of these same behaviors between Sasquatch and known primates, they're almost on the same parallel path of known primates. They do the same type of stuff. It's nothing new. Throw rocks. I posted a video the other day of a gorilla throwing a rock. This gorilla threw a rock like it was a pitcher for the Dodgers. I mean, the thing threw a rock like no one's business. But you see this animalistic type behavior, so I just have a hard time buying into the paranormal. Now, going back to the light question, the orbs. I started getting have from hunters, hikers, people who aren't even into the Bigfoot world, that would send me emails and say, hey, have you ever seen lights? I'd say, well, what do you mean lights? So they just start describing these lights they saw in the forest. Little orbs flying around, seem to have direction, seem to have path, seem to be intelligently controlled, just randomly flying through the woods. I'm not talking about like orbs flying around the sky. I'm talking about orbs flying through the forest. And I remember I asked Bob Garrett, I said, have you ever heard of anything like this? people keep asking me about these lights, and I have no idea what they're talking about. Bob got real quiet and goes, let me show you something. So he pulls up a video that he took of this weird light flying through the forest. And it looked like it was lit up. It was a little bit bigger than a baseball. Maybe a little bit smaller than a basketball, but about the size of a baseball, flying through the forest. I said, Bob, where did you get this from? And he said, there's an area out in East Texas called Lights. The locals call it Lights. Every night these lights fly around the forest. And all the locals know about it. They just call them lights. If you want to go down and see the lights, you can go down and see the lights. And it's been going on for hundreds of years. I guess a guy from Japan came down to study them, and his conclusion was it was some sort of organism flying around. I just have a hard time buying into the paranormal stuff, man. I just have a really hard time. Now, do I think it goes on? Absolutely. Do I think it's Bigfoot related? No, I don't. I think it's two separate issues going on. So when someone says, hey, I saw a UFO and I saw a Bigfoot, I don't think you're too far off on that. And my explanation of it has changed a lot from, I was very unsure, didn't know what to think. And the reason why I bring this up, because this is a pretty hot topic. A lot of people talk about that. You have paranormal shows, you have Bigfoot, Sasquatch shows that are related, and then you have shows that are kind of the two together. My thinking has changed. I don't believe that. I used to think, oh yeah, it's all paranormal, this is all crazy, and this is all UFO related. But you know what, after talking to thousands or hundreds of people, probably hundreds of people, you've done thousands, it's changed. The part that hasn't changed is, and I'm going to agree with you on this, is I do believe it's two separate topics. You know what? I got a story for you.